I'm working on stories that border properties, port facilities, money laundering for fentanyl, methamphetamine, ketamine, legalized cannabis that has been taken over by Chinese organized crime in British Columbia and Ontario. All of this system is being run through this very same United Front Work Department. That's the key here. Senior level Chinese state-sponsored officials and operatives in Canada are running a vast money laundering and trafficking system through properties that are known to Beijing, used by Beijing. And what it's called is the United Front being behind this North American illicit finance, fentanyl money laundering for cartels. The operations are so complex that they include, trying to again surround and corrupt Western politicians. And within those networks, we have the most senior levels. Mike, you remember very well how I broke the story of the Vancouver model, the casino money laundering. We're talking about triad leaders set up in Vancouver and Toronto, again, Richmond and Markham, to be more specific, in something called the Company, which is a network of the highest level Asian organized crime that just have tremendous financial infrastructure, corporate infrastructure, political connectivity in Canada.
Sam Cooper is North America's leading investigative research into Chinese interference. I mean, he's the guy that CSIS and U.S. security authorities actually consult huge number of wide-ranging issues, including election interference, Chinese psyops, the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party into government, fentanyl. I mean, the list is a long one. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Money Talks Book of the Year, I might add, Willful Blindness. And there's an updated version you can get right now. Go to Amazon and do that, as well as the founder of the very popular thebureau.news. You find it on Substack. Oh, God, tens of thousands of subscribers, Sam. That's got to feel good when you look at that. But thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, great to be back, Mike. And it does feel good that the platform is really growing across North America.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's what I mean. I'm sure it's a North America-wide audience, as this is, Chinese interference or whatever I want to label it, is obviously a continued problem. I mean, what jumps out at us, of course, is we got a federal election in a couple of days. One of the things that drives me nuts in the media when I see something that's so misleading, and the headline I'm referring to is Chinese communists target Mark Carney. No, that was not true. That's a negative pejorative on that. What they were doing was supporting Mark Carney.
No doubt, Mike. I mean, and I was in that briefing from the site task force, and I think two things were going on. One, you have some media entities, major media entities, where the reporters either don't know or don't care the truth about the proven truth that for various reasons, China does favor the Liberal Party of Canada. And it's pretty clear to see why, because the Liberals have more friendly policies towards them. People as prominent as John McCallum, the former ambassador and Liberal minister, even said as much openly. So that's the story. But what happened there is CITE, in their timid steps towards actually acting on foreign interference, they wouldn't come out and say that quite clearly whatever commentary is going on in Chinese-controlled intelligence operations on WeChat, TikTok, all these other entities, it favors Carney and the Liberals. There may be a little bit of negativity thrown in here and there in a sophisticated way, but yes, they were boosting him. But the site task force officials, which includes senior government officials, they wouldn't adopt that language, and they stuck to targeting, which other media took that bait and ran with it. And it was the proof that it was beneficial to Carney. It didn't tell the real story. You saw Liberal politicians tweeting that story, which just shows you how there must have been a lot of high-fiving in Liberal Party headquarters that CBC and others took the bait on that.
Well, the other thing that jumped out at me, and I was saying, you're sitting there nodding your head. Others are shocked, But when you look at some of the problems with Markham, Ontario, and of course, if you don't mind, for people who aren't up to that speed on that story, if you could just share it with us.
Yeah, Mike. There's really two two nodes of, and I've got one of these cat situations. Don't mind me. I'm sorry.
No.
There's two huge nodes of Chinese interference going on in Canada. One very near to where your studio will be in Vancouver, Richmond, British Columbia. We know through documents that has key writings for the Ministry of State Security. That is, Chinese intelligence wants to choose who's elected in Richmond. Also, Markham, Ontario, I call it the East Coast doppelganger of Richmond. So, in my research, this is the highest levels globally of Chinese organized crime and the most intensive of Chinese intelligence operations are, are working together to, again, pick candidates. And that brings up what happened with now Prime Minister Mark Carney when he was running to be the leader of the Liberal Party in January. He made an appearance with a group called the Jiangsu Commerce Society. This group has known and proven overt links to the United Front in that province in China. There are exchanges of letters during the PPE, exchange operations in the pandemic when China was sucking our safety equipment away, giving it back to their citizens. They were using United Front operatives in Markham. And this is how I know and reported of those links between this group, the Jiangsu Commerce, who meet with Mark Carney. Mark Carney denies it after the Globe and Mail report it. But I'm saying very important meeting. It's not just that the United Front can be overtly linked to this group, which I'm asserting has connections through leaders to Liberal Party fundraisers, has connections, I'm asserting, to riding bosses in the Markham area, has connections to candidates, has connections to a well-known Markham underground casino I've reported on. I could go on and on. It's a big mess of interference. And as you know, Mark Carney denies that meeting, baldly denies it, even though photographs show it.
Yeah.
But here's the key. Look, when you got a leader like Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, meeting with senior United Front operatives, and it's amplified on Chinese media, this is a signal to the community that Beijing wants you to vote for this guy. And to be fair, as we know, this isn't just limited to the Liberal Party. I can tell you, Michael, there are conservative candidates, NDP candidates appearing with these United Front operatives. And of course, the Conservative Party has some of its own issues with the government of India.
Just to back up just for just a second, the United Front Work Department, again, am I accurate to say it's sort of the leading external influence machine of the Chinese Communist Party?
Absolutely. It's a great word to call it a machine. Xi Jinping, the General Secretary and President, calls it the magic weapon of Communist China. And as I've reported, because I read the documents, everyone can now, the Canadian government knows that in 2012, when Xi takes power, he ramps up the funding and resourcing of the United Front Work Department massively. So I believe thousands to tens of thousands more funded cadres around the world, and very especially prominently in Canada, saturates our politicians, surround our politicians. These are literal words from Canadian government documents, and they're there to cajole, persuade, pressure our party leaders, our Democratic Party leaders, to pick the candidates of Beijing. And I'll add, Mike, it's very important that I think I've been the only one reporting it at a mainstream media or my own independent level for a while, that organized crime tasked within the United Front is doing so much, including moving money for illegal reasons, obviously, but what would look on the surface as legal fundraising. And so they're a huge part of the people that rub shoulders with our political leaders. That's what the United Front is about. And the thought that springs to my mind is I'm writing a story right now about the very same thing is happening in Australia's election, the very same networks that we see in Markham and Richmond.
And let's go to the candidates just for a sec, again, to remind people that you had in the Markham riding, you had, I'm trying to think of the name, Paul Chung having to step down, and then replaced by Peter Ewan, who's, as you just said, he's, with some direct participation. I mean, there's so much to this. And I'm sorry, I'm all over the map, but I got to come back to one thing you said about Mark Carney. What a farce when he says, I don't know these people. And then there's pictures of him with them. But sorry, I digressed. But,
Yeah.
the candidates themselves, and they've forced to have one candidate resign.
Yeah. So we can break that down a little bit. Look, yeah, I pretty much broke the story of how Paul
Yes.
Chiang, this former Markham area police officer, uh, is openly speaking to a small group of select Chinese Canadian journalists in Toronto in January 2025. And he's asked, what do you think, Mr. Liberal MP and candidate, about your rival in the Markham area, conservative Joseph Tay, who's wanted on one of these Hong Kong bounties, which you and I and every reasonable person in Canada knows is an illegal bounty on a Canadian citizen by Beijing security forces. But these Chinese diaspora journalists ask a straight question, and Mr. Chiang gives a straight answer. He says, it would cause a great controversy for Canada if someone is elected to parliament while being under that bounty. That was no joke. That was a straight statement. He then goes on to say, so if you want to collect that bounty, you can take this man to the Toronto consulate. Ha ha. He then indicates he's joking, but it was not a joke. As Joseph Tay said, and I reported, those comments are part of the Chinese Communist Party statecraft. They are meant not only to threaten and target Joseph Tay. Again, they're reported in the media by these Chinese journalists who, as I've reported, are under the thumb completely of Beijing. They choose his comments and it goes out to the community. Again, sending that signal. If you vote for Joseph Tay, you're going to be in trouble because we probably have ways of finding out. So it's a very complex operation. And, we've continued to learn more in the recent days. Again, this site task force disclosed finally on the record that indeed an extremely sophisticated media operation targeting Joseph Tay has been underway. And as someone that really picks up on details, I found it very interesting that in December 2024, and in the following months, the very same message was leveraged in Beijing controlled media that works its way into Canada, saying it would be a big problem if Joseph Tay gets elected. Canada will become a haven for fugitives.
Wow.
The audacity, right? But that message parallels what Mr. Chiang said. And so I won't ramble on, but, of course, I break the story. A lot of people jump on that. Carney supports Paul Chiang in the face of this evidence. The RCMP, I believe, is pretty much shamed into coming out and saying, okay, we're going to at least look at the circumstances. So what does Carney do? He chooses another area police officer, Peter Yuen, former senior Toronto police executive. I break the story that Mr. Yuen traveled to Beijing to participate in a People's Liberation Army victory parade celebrating World War II victory over Japan. Others on that trip include Canadian politicians, who I won't go into the names, but should be very important in the election interference story, and senior so-called community leaders, again, who are part of this united front. And the one more piece, I broke the news that Peter Yuen had joined the board of a Toronto Chinese international student school, which was directly related to alleged interference activities in one of those Markham area ridings. So I feel that we could go on and on. These are the known knowns. The unknown knowns of the interference happening, I believe, is a lot more widespread.
Just a quick note. It's not that anyone's disputing the United Front work department is in Canada, is operating in Canada. That's not, we don't have one side. We're allowing this. That's what kills me. And then that brings me to ask, I mean, you've been on this story for years, but we were very clear with some information we got more to the public recognition of it. I'll call this not your recognition, but the public. And it's actually thanks to your work. But, we knew this for the 2019, 2021 election. I haven't seen much improvement in protecting the quality, integrity of our democracy, our elections. since those times, despite this information.
You're exactly right, Michael. That's what I'm hearing from sources in Canadian police, sources in Canadian intelligence. It's very clear that this Hogue Commission was simply a whitewash, a papering over of problems. And as I've said and will continue to say very, very assertively, the Hogue Commission at the end of the day is a disservice because it covered up, I'm asserting, the involvement of people, that interfered in writings that it was tasked to investigate. These will be the very same people that traveled to Beijing with Peter Yuen, and people only sort of know about that now. The same people, that have had bank accounts, deplatformed, as you can read in the Globe and Mail about certain individuals. The Hogue Commission knew all of this. They knew about the clandestine funding. They knew the names. They didn't call these people for evidence. And even worse, in the Kenny Chu situation, which is, the former Conservative MP targeted in Richmond because he had the tongue-in-cheek audacity to introduce, a bill for a foreign agent registry. Chinese intelligence didn't want that. Kenny Chu is attacked. Everyone can see the evidence is very clear. And yet the Hogue Commission didn't come out and say, he lost his seat because of that. And so Chu is then tries to run again in 2025, and his opponents smear him again, saying the Hogue Commission gave China a clean bill of health. They didn't do anything wrong here. So look, the Hogue Commission, at the end of the day, when I boil it all down, I'm glad that Canadians have records that they can openly read and come to their own decisions. But you're absolutely right. The problem hasn't gotten any better, and I believe it's gotten worse due to the way our government has handled these leaks and media disclosures so far.
Now, people obviously can access your work, as I say, the leading investigative journalist into these issues, both sides of the border, et cetera. So we don't have enough time, but I've got to come to the fentanyl organized crime side of it also. That, of course, gained great notoriety when President Trump mentions it off the top in November after his election. So, again, I know it's a huge subject. You're spending every day on it, but can you give us a bit of a summation there, of the relationship, organized crime, China, fentanyl, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. You framed it, and I'll actually give you a little insight into something I'm working on currently with access to very senior Canadian policing intelligence experts and very senior American policing intelligence experts. And Mike, my point of view has been that Canada has a deep problem with fentanyl. I reported it in my book, Willful Blindness, in 2021. And yet, to the point where within the past year or two, Canada Border Services Agency put out, a press statement saying Canada is a fentanyl exporting nation. A little bit of truth there. It was encouraging to our American, friends in government. But what happened, soon after, the RCMP came out and said, no, we're not an export nation. So that's just a little detail I want to throw in there about the denialism at a political level that is filtering down into the leadership of our agencies that are tasked with not only protecting our country, but being a good neighbor. So what's going on with Canada's fentanyl problem? You've seen the figures of people, in the Globe and Mail, probably the CBC, running with the Liberal talking points that it's only 1% of fentanyl, in comparison to 99 from Mexico. And look, that's just hogwash. We have super labs in British Columbia. Since President Trump made this an issue, very interestingly, the RCMP has stepped forward and busted a few labs. Look, I believe that we don't have the full picture on how much fentanyl Canada is sending into the United States. I think it's a lot, and a lot more that is a lot more than is known at this point. But certainly, we're on the record as a fentanyl exporter. That no one should doubt that. And so we, getting into my advocacy, I'm saying we need to change laws, as I advocated in my book, Willful Blindness. to have an actual anti-racketeering law, bring that together with strong foreign interference laws, because to the point of your question, in summation, I already knew, but I'm working on stories that border properties, port facilities, money laundering for fentanyl, methamphetamine, ketamine, legalized cannabis that has been taken over by Chinese organized crime in British Columbia and Ontario. All of this system is being run through this very same United Front Work Department. That's the key here. Senior level Chinese state-sponsored officials and operatives in Canada are running a vast money laundering and trafficking system through properties that are known to Beijing, used by Beijing, and what it's called is the United Front being behind this North American illicit finance, fentanyl money laundering for cartels. The operations are so complex that they include, trying to, again, surround and corrupt Western politicians. And within those networks, we have the most senior levels. Mike, you remember very well how I broke the story of the Vancouver model, the casino
Yes.
money laundering. We're talking about triad leaders set up in Vancouver and Toronto, again, Richmond and Markham, to be more specific, in something called the Company, which is a network of the highest level Asian organized crime that just have tremendous financial infrastructure, corporate infrastructure, political connectivity in Canada. So that's the fentanyl story. To sum that all up, bigger than we know, the United States, as rude and mean as they're being with those tariffs, they have a right to say, we want to protect American lives, and you should be wanting to protect Canadian lives too. What's the percentage coming from Canada? My US government and Canadian government sources say it's meaningful. It's a lot. And we need to crack down on it, or these tariffs won't go away. That, we need a government that takes it seriously.
Well, and as you say, both Canadian and Americans are dying. I mean, the number who are dying of fentanyl overdoses in Canada alone should spur on, a renewed effort. And when we come to the policing of this issue, and again, when they're in the denial mode, that's not going to happen. When we're saying, oh no, it's not that big a deal, we're not sending stuff, we happen to be using the States. But I'm saying, yeah, but what about in Canada too? I mean, on both sides of the border, you'd think that would be motivation enough.
You'd think it would be motivation enough, and it springs thoughts in my mind that, I'm trying to be a Canadian patriot here and say, yeah, if you're denying the problem, why are you denying it? Whether you're a journalist or an RCMP senior official that's under the thumb of the Prime Minister's office saying it's only 1%. No, it's not. It's not. We have super labs. We have Chinese organized crime with connections to Canadian politicians running these extremely sophisticated trade-based money laundering operations from Vancouver and Toronto. As we know, the TD Bank, as I've reported repeatedly now, is connected to this fentanyl money laundering, which is the very same model we saw in the BC government casinos. That is using the diaspora as a front to, take drug cash into Canadian businesses. So if you're denying that, why are you denying it? And, Mike, I think I know the reason, and the people I talk in the US government think they know the reason. There's, a problem again with Canadian laws that need to be changed. There's a problem with some people, ignorant, naive. Maybe they're getting their Canadian pride back up. Yeah, let's be Canadian patriots and pride and do something about this. And the last and final problem is, I believe, and I'm hearing it from both Canadians and Americans, people of the highest integrity, at some level, this willful blindness should relate to corruption. That is, people with powerful jobs in Canada's government don't want the evidence to come out that, yeah, they're getting some fundraising from people directly involved in these money laundering schemes. I think at the end of the day, I'm convinced that's part of the problem.
Well, Sam, I know I promise not to keep you, but this is why I recommend the Bureau.news to people, because Sam is a leading investigator on this subject, but so many stories have been brought to the broader public's attention thanks to that work. And I just can't tell you how important I think it is, Sam. So thank you for taking the time, and congratulations both.
Thanks, and great to join you again, Mike. And I just say, Canadians, vote wisely and vote well.
Thank you.